Hello everyone and welcome. Yes, my name is Arafire. Welcome back to another episode of All Talk, No Shock.
All talk, no shock.
Where can you believe it's been 10 years or so since Combiner Wars? Remember Combiner Wars, the start of a new trilogy, probably the start of a first trilogy that we now seem to get as par for the course. This was the start of a new toy line, but also forming a bit of a mass media along with it. Specifically at the time, Hasbro were quite keen to start a new toy line, introducing Combiners and ultimately Titans and other Prime figures with accompanying media behind it. And today we're going to ask the question, and we're going to talk about it, was Combiner Wars any good? Now in particular, we are just going to focus on Combiner Wars. We're not quite going to go into Titans Return. We're not quite going to go into Power of the Primes yet. It is part of the Prime Wars Trilogy. We'll get there. Don't worry about that. So yeah, can you believe it's 10 years since the start of Combiner Wars? What? And as such, we are going to be consulting TF Wiki, because I had to look back at some of the releases because I remember most of them. I think a lot of us had a lot of these figures in our collection, but there's some of them I did forget about. Thank God this is here. So much like the name suggests, Combiner Wars, Combiners were the gimmick, and it's probably the first reissuing of Combiners from the Generation 1 designs and molds since the 1980s, other than having encore reissues or going into the universes and things like Superior Maximus. We are actually getting new Combiners now, or new molds of existing Combiners, but ultimately new Combiners as well. So much was its gimmick, became quite oversaturated for me with the enigma of combination and leading into what possible combination of Combiners we can have, making new Combiners that didn't quite stick with the original limited amount. However, we also got the start of the Legend Class, which has now since been discontinued, and personally I don't mind that too much, but a much smaller scale. Now Legends Class does still exist in the third party realms, very small micro scale figures that Hasbro did use more towards the smaller scale figures. Looking at the wiki here, we have the likes of Bombshell, it does go into Thundercracker as well, but Warpath, Huffer, some of the mini bots, but it also included some of the figures like Rodimus. But it went back into Protectobot Groove, and that was a bit of a shame because Groove was not part of the original combining team that would make up Defensor. Instead, it was a bit that stuck on Defensor's chest, if I remember, and it didn't look great. I did get it, but I didn't really want it. And ultimately, Groove will come out as under a deluxe to be the proper leg of a proper Defensor in the fullness of time. But looking at some of the figures in the first wave anyway, we had Bombshell, Autobot Powerglide, as opposed to Decepticon Powerglide, Thundercracker, Windcharger, and then going into Wave 2, Decepticon Blackjack, Huffer, Wave 3, Protectobot Groove, very small Legend Class one, Decepticon Viper, who was a repaint of Powerglide, Warpath, and then Rodimus and Skywarp. So there was a good balance of Autobot and Decepticons. But again, this was dinky, this was Legends Class, and not that many people went in for it. Going into Wave 5, we had Buzzsaw, Decepticon Chop Shop, Autobot Pipes, and Decepticon Shockwave. Finishing off in 6th came Retgar, and we were quite pleased to have these characters because again, where are the chances, even in Legend scale, that you were going to get another Retgar? It might not have been the scale that you wanted, but probably the first toy since the 1980s, so it's good that we were actually getting some of these characters around. It was a good opportunity to bring back, or really bring everyone together. Then we went into Deluxes, because this was really where the meat and bones came of these Combiner classes. The bulk of the bodies of the Combiners were Voyager Class or Leader Class, but the Deluxe classes were being the limbs, so they were really taking the weight. They were coming with the accessories, the hands and the feet that you could plug into. Starting off, we had the introduction of Alpha Bravo, who I can't really understand why Alpha Bravo was introduced, but going into the lore of stories, Slingshot does not survive getting torn in half by Prowler Stator, and as such you have to have a new addition to the aerial bots, and this is where the helicopter of Alpha Bravo came in. He was all over the place in the shots, but I really couldn't be sure why. And also famously, Slingshot was really hard to find if you wanted to get that true G1 Superion. I myself had the Superion Combiner. I myself had to use Alpha Bravo, like a lot of us did. Then you went into Drag Strip for the Stunticons. I'll quickly touch on the Stunticons. They were not great. Motormaster was okay, but Menasor was not a good combiner, and it has been a very long time since under the Generations line that we've had a good Menasor since. Firefly was also there, interestingly called Firefly, and had a faceplate rather than an open mouth for G1. This is of course Fireflight, the aerial bot combiner. Skydive as well, very orange face. Air Raid, one of my personal favourites on the line. Breakdown and Dead End and Decepticon Off-Road. Again, we've got another mix and match for the Stunticons. But also under Wave 3 we had the Protectobots. Protectobots First Aid, Rook, Blades and Streetwise. We had all 4 of them out in one hit. It was quite interesting to get all 4 out in one wave, particularly nowadays, or in waves ever since, that you have to wait to start to piece your combiners together, even at the moment with Age of the Primes. Again, this is still in the deluxe line, but we have Ironhide, Mirage, Prowl and Sunstreaker. Don't worry, they become combiners too. Also introducing the Combaticons, Blast Off, Into a Jet Not a Space Shuttle, Brawl, Swindle and Vortex. Notably saying Decepticon Vortex. I was quite a fan of the Combaticons. Again, best I think they've looked. Particularly Swindle came out quite well, if I remember rightly. Blast Off not being a space shuttle, being a jet, I think makes more sense if they were to be World War II jets, World War II vehicles, I should say. Then why would he be a space shuttle if he was made in the 1940s? That never made sense to me. So the fact he was effectively Slingshot remolded to be a Harrier style jet, again, that worked for me more, but for people who didn't want that, they'd have to wait for a separate deluxe reissue, similar with Groove, that could be part of Bruticus. And under Wave 6 we had Wheeljack, Hound, Smokescreen and Trailbreaker. Yes, they combine too. Then we get into the bigger ranges, the Voyager class, which even now seems to be one of the more popular ranges. As such, we have Optimus Prime and Silverbolt, so we're starting to get Autobots as well. Optimus Prime was a very popular mould, particularly looked good in robot mode, had a very so-so alt mode, I always felt. Motormaster came next, again probably the best looking of the Stunticons. Hotspot, again carry on with Torsos. Cyclonus as well. You guessed it, Combiner. And then Battle Core Optimus Prime, which I myself got recently, and I think definitely is the best use of that Optimus mould, to be a white Prime. Dreamwave Prime, is it heat resistant Prime? For me, I used it with a very difficult to apply upgrade kit to make it into Nova Prime. It really works for it, but my god, was that hard to find, and that was only a couple of years ago. Still had to pay a fair price for it. Under Wave 5 we have Onslaught and Scattershot starting to get the Technobots now. Quite interesting, again, to get all of these combiners at once. There is a sense of it being maybe too much, maybe overkill, but we were starved at combiners at this point. Finishing off with Skylinks. Again, is this the first mould of a Skylink since G1? It doesn't walk, but great to have, considering it's been starved for so long. This is what this new trilogy gave us. Then moving into Leader Class, Megatron and Armada Megatron. I always felt Armada Megatron was a bit of a cop-out. It was just the same as Megatron, just redecoed. Okay, they're both into tanks, because even at this point, 10 years ago, Megatron was not going to be a gun again. And this tank mode for G1 Megatron, and the same for Armada Megatron, but particularly G1, looked really good. It worked, and I felt it was a better use of the character, even if I was never sold on a robot mode, but I felt his design worked. It's what a G1 Megatron over time would have looked like. Thundercracker, and later in Wave 4 Starscream, and in Wave 5 Skywarp, so we can get all the Seekers. I always felt these guys looked a bit basic, a bit ordinary, and it's taken really until Earthrise till they start getting proper molds. Plus they looked very sizable, very over-accentuated by the hands perhaps. They really stuck out to me, and they were by no means terrible, but I felt they could have been better. Ultra Magnus, this is where I love this alt mode. It's much beefier, particularly when you look at the alt mode, the cab, the very fine windows and the big grille. It looked aggressive, it looked menacing, and it came with Minimus Ambus. This is where the accompanying comic came along with it. And then finishing off with a Titan. This is where it got a bit interesting. This was a Titan price point, but it wasn't a Titan. It was Devastator, but it was a very, very large Devastator, and it was not going to be in scale with the combiners that came with it. I always felt this was a bit of a miss. I felt that by having, yes, a 6-bot combiner, and yes, a popular combiner, but you got waves of other combiners in this. Why is this so much bigger? Devastator was not perceived to be any bigger or smaller than Superion or Defensor or Bruticus, so why would it be so much bigger than it was? Why would it be at a Titan class size? A la Combiner, I've never quite understood why Predaking afterwards, and we'll get to that, falls into that Titan size, even though it's a Combiner. It's either a Titan or a Combiner, it can't be both. But this Combiner, this Devastator, is still looked after today, and particularly now with the release under Age of Primes, a lot of people are saying they're going to stay with their older versions. I can understand. I think it has its limitations of its time, but I do not think it's bad. I think its size has actually worked for it over time. I think it's real heavy nature, perhaps sacrifice of the individual modes, really gives it its added flavour that arguably the lesser combiners, the smaller combiners in this wave, no longer have. Carrying on with combiners, you also saw G2 repaints. You carried on with a G2 Superion, G2 Menasor, looking very garish, I might add. You got the introduction of Victorion, who was brought through as a new combiner or new characters in the IDW comics, which is accompanying media, and I'll cover that in a second. Bruticus as well, along with Contpuchon and Lyokaiser. Again, first Lyokaiser since G1. And this went into the Unite Warriors, the Takara repaints, particularly when you look at the Combiner box sets. They still go for a pretty penny nowadays when you look at the Computron sets and Abominus sets that came later. Some of the more jazzed up versions, pardon the pun, that gave those older combiners something more to look at. So talking about the accompanying media, this is where I think Hasbro did the right thing. They decided to go with the mobile game of Earth Wars, which is still live to this day, and really introduce the combiners into that. So that was accompanying media as well. That had stories being written by the likes of Simon Furman and was kind of added media along with the bios that came with the stories for the characters. On top of that, this was massively pushed by IDW Comics. Many a story was really being born out of the comics for the toys to follow, but it gave you a reason to want to buy it. And to the point that when you saw them in the comics, it was much like the old Marvel comics, or at least Ladybird comics, where you would see almost exact toy drawings in the comics that you would get in the packs. Again, it made you want to get it. And this is what I've said since really Legacy and Age of the Primes today. Without accompanying media, it kind of makes a toy line feel hollow. This didn't back here. Even if the toys weren't the absolute pinnacle, with something to read or something to watch or something to play, you could then get a toy line that feeds into that. It makes you want to invest into it more. So to sum it all up, was it any good? I think some of the designs, naturally over 10 years, have aged. I think we've learned a lot since then. I think Hasbro have learned a lot. I think we as collectors have learned a lot as well. I really felt, such was the name of Combiner Wars and starting to use artifacts like the Enigma combination, when you started getting Elita combiners, Cyclonus combiners, Skylynx combiners, Optimus Maximus combiners, it got silly and it got exhausting. And it's been 10 years or so that we have had to wait to get combiners again. It was nice to have, but it was overkill. It was too much. But it shaped the way for how we were going to get toys and stories going forward. From this point on, everything became a trilogy, having a start, middle, and end point. And more often than not, it would have accompanying media to sell it. Now, obviously, Hasbro would have to fund that elsewhere. There would be more expenses and more storylines to be drawn up, publications to be agreed. So that comes with its expense, but I have always felt that gave it a reason to want to invest into it more. You're excited to read about what your characters who are on your shelf would be doing in the next issue. And that's something I think is really, really lacking from some of these more modern releases. Broadly speaking, I think the Legends classes didn't work. I think that's a market that just didn't get taken up. And I think some of the deluxes were very, very basic, but there are some hidden gems that have lasted to this day. Battle Core Optimus Prime and the Combiner Wars Devastator, the Titan class, is much sought after to this day still. The Megatron as well does still have a place, even if some of the more subsequent toy lines, even under Hasbro's Generations line, have replaced them over time. But you will still find a lot of people that still have Combiner Wars figures or Prime Wars figures in their collection. You will get exclusives back then, be it with Target, Toys R Us, much like you will with Hasbro Pulse of today. But having something that you could buy along to it and collect everything that you read, I've always felt makes a difference. And it was fun to get into combiners again. Even if you did have to have a second bite at the cherry to get a deluxe groove, a deluxe blast off, and then even in some cases you had to get upgrade kits. And believe me, they made all the difference. But some of those figures still hold a place even now. And yes, it was a toy line of its time, but it does shape the way of how we view toy lines even now. People have been into the game for over 10 years or more, and they're still collecting the same way as they did back with Combiner Wars. It has set a trend. Regardless of whether we think it was good, it has shaped the way we have done collecting ever since, under waves and under classes. But there we go. That is, was it any good for Combiner Wars? But I'd love to know what you guys think. What were your memories of the Combiner Wars element of the Prime Wars trilogy? Is it that nostalgia is playing back in now? Is it now thinking that it has a place there because you had a good time collecting, particularly now Combiners are coming back round? Leave a note in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and hit that subscribe button because I will see you on the next one.